Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ. My name is Douglas Parsons. If you're not driving a vehicle at the moment, or if you are not using some type of dangerous equipment, I'd like you to just close your eyes for a moment and think about the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender icons that you know about. Have those names and faces come to your mind? I hope that within some of those names that came to your mind and those faces, they were not necessarily all male. When I did this myself, initially, 8 out of 10 of those faces were male. And you start to think about the reasons why. Is that because I am a male cisgender person myself? Is it because when I came out into the community, I was surrounded by strong male father figures? Is it media? There's a lot of those things that have caused me to do some thinking. And I say this all right now because Tales of the LGBTQ plus is important for myself, but it's important for others as well because we elevate voices and make sure that you know the damn good work that people have done throughout the years. And that's not just talking about the men who've come before us and the people who are doing the work now. Today's guest is Liz Massiah. And Liz Massiah is, dare I say, an institution within the Edmonton LGBTQ plus community. She's someone who has seen it all. She's someone who has been there. She's the one who's written policies. And I want all of you to know her because her voice, her name, her giving back to the community is just as important, if not more, than perhaps some of those names and faces that came to your mind in that small little response that we were doing. So today's guest is Liz Massiah. We're going to talk about the first Pride in Edmonton, creating community, creating roles. We're not going to be able to fit everything into one episode. So Liz and I have talked. There's going to be a part 2. There's going to be a part 3 because you can't put all of this into a quick podcast, wrap it up in a bow, and call it a day. These are our stories. These are your stories. And I know by listening to Liz's story today, you're going to go, that's it. That's what I need to know. And another name, another force who have helped develop our community. So today on Tales of the LGBTQ+, my very special guest, Liz Massiah. How's it going today?
It's going pretty darn fine. It's
Good.
There's sunshine and there's none of that white stuff falling, so we're ahead of the game.
Exactly. It's weird having a Halloween where we didn't actually have snow on the ground for
I
once.
know, I know, I know. And Remembrance Day is coming, and so often it's cold and nasty. So here's hoping. Here's
Exactly.
hoping it'll be nice. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, I know that the little thinking that I did at the beginning and asking people to close their eyes and bring some immediate names to their mind. I know that you've done this before, and am I correct in my belief in my statement that the women of our 2S LGBTQIA community have been overlooked?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's almost the norm, and has been for many years. And I think of the many hours that many women have put into doing various kinds of community work and are rarely acknowledged or rarely mentioned. And it just makes me sad because so much of the work is done by women, but it's seldom recognized.
Is there a reason for that? Does it go back to the broader world where men are put on the pedestals and are placed at the forefront? Or is there something specific to our rainbow community that does this as well?
I think it's both. I think it's clearly misogyny, where things that are done by men are seen as more important
Mhm,
or more special. Women's sexuality is not regarded as important as that of the male, and so I think that for gay men, when um, they reveal their non-heterosexual sexuality, it's a very, in some ways I think it's a more dangerous risk,
mm,
um, because of the fear of homosexuals that still is around. And women are often seen as, oh, well, those two girls who lived down the road, or great Aunt Mary who lived with that, what was her, a good friend of hers, wasn't it?
mm.
But
Yeah.
they lived together and traveled together, and when the older one died, Aunt Mary was just devastated. And so there's a lot of that invisibility, I think, that comes with being a female and being a lesbian. And so in many ways we're not seen as important.
Mhm,
And as I said to you when you would ask me about providing a photograph, and I said, well, one of the things in any of the photos that I can think of providing, they all include other people, male and female, simply because all of this work has to be done in a context with others. And there are those who just insist on not acknowledging that. And so, yeah, I think it's a combination of misogyny, and human beings are quite tribal. We don't
yeah,
like to talk about it very much, but we are still very much governed by our need for physical safety.
yeah,
And anything that, the science is telling us that the first thing we look for in any situation is, are we safe, or are we safe enough? And so when you've been excluded and shunned in the quote unquote ordinary world, and you finally find a space where you belong to your tribe, um, sometimes those tribes can get really small and really tiny.
yeah,
And that's unfortunate, but um, I think it's true. And there's a story from years ago with when the Michigan Women's Music Festival was on, and there's always been contention between feminists and lesbians, and apparently it got to the point where people were dividing off into such small groups that there was a tent that had a sign on it said redheaded lesbians with children only. And so I don't know if it's actually true, but it shows how the tribal instinct also produces a good deal of narrowness.
yeah,
And so sometimes we just want to be with our tribe. And if that's for gay men, they want to be with gay men. Sometimes I just want to be around a bunch of lesbian women. And that's just the truth of it. But
yeah.
I do believe that there's not been much effort, not really been enough of an effort to be as inclusive as I think it should be.
Yeah, I can understand that in a lot of ways. It took me a while to become comfortable with myself.
Yeah,
Growing up and throughout my 20s, I was comfortable being around women, especially
yeah,
women who are older than me.
yeah,
There was that shelter in place. And
yeah,
when I started coming into my own in my early 30s, I then gravitated towards males and being around in my community, my tribe, bears and otters
Yeah.
and finding my place there. And then I got into this silo where I never expanded out of that. And it's
Hmm.
only been within the last couple of years and myself doing this podcast as well as my Pride Corner on White, where, oh my gosh, Liz, there's lesbians out there and
Uh-huh.
there's other people that I have not communicated with in a long time. And I've always been a open person, but I'm shocked with myself with how narrow focused I did become. And
Hmm.
it's sad, but it's the way I became. So everything that you were saying there, I completely understand based on my own
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
There's something that you also said here, and I want to explore because this is something I don't know much about. But you mentioned that there was a divide or a disconnect between feminists and lesbians.
And the early feminists, white heterosexual women who were working against patriarchy and misogyny and the notion that women who loved women also were impacted by culture was not a very popular one.
Hmm.
And there's lots and lots and lots that's been written on it. There's been a divide. There still is a divide. There have been various so-called waves of feminism. There's been lots of conflict about. I remember years ago, there was a magazine, a women's magazine here in town that the name of which just escaped me. And I would write a column in it, and I always wrote about stuff as a lesbian. And I had lots of feedback about, why are you always going on about that lesbian stuff? And trying to say, well, because my life experience and my day-to-day lived experience is different than the that of the heterosexual woman. So it's just an example of, we're, women trying really hard to make our space in the world, and then having another layer of difference manifest in those of us who are not uh, intimate with men. So
Is there a definition that you can give? Obviously, a definition for the word lesbian is someone who's interested in the same sex, same gender, perhaps, feminine, female in this. Is there a larger, broader definition for the word lesbian that you have held throughout these years?
um, I think for me it's been simply um, a woman who is intimately, emotionally, and sexually attracted primarily to women. That one of the litmus tests years ago was, and I'll still remember it. I think it's when the movie Desert Heart came out, and Jane Rule was a friend of mine, and she'd come to Edmonton to speak, and so she had written the book Desert Heart, and it was released, and it was a lesbian story. And so a whole bunch of us, male and female, went to the opening night. And what I remembered was that there was a trailer, an ad for some holiday place that, was an advertisement. And so afterwards, the men were all busy talking about the men in their bathing suits in this ad, and the women, the lesbians, were busy talking about the women in their bathing suits. And I remember turning to one guy and saying, I didn't even notice there were men. And he said, I didn't even notice the women. And so that's, to me, what it means is that in a situation like that, where there were, gorgeous people up on the screen of diverse appearances, etc., we lesbians were watching the women, and the men were watching the men.
Amen. It's
That's just how it is. And so it's often funny when I'll be out, or well, pre-COVID, when you used to be out more, but be out with a bunch of colleagues, maybe all professionals, and I would find myself noticing some gorgeous woman in the restaurant, and finally they would realize Liz is looking at that woman, and we're looking at her too.
yep,
And I'm sure you've had those experiences as well.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Liz, when you came out of the womb, were you a fully formed activist, community organizer, or was this something that has developed with you over the years?
Well, I credit my great grandma Kate Massiah. Um, she was long gone before I was born, but she was quite the legend in the family and often talked about. And my dad was very close to her. And Kate was the first female journalist in the House of Commons.
Oh,
Yeah. And Kate didn't brook nonsense from anybody. And it was only 10 or 15 years ago that I put it together that my granddad was named Wilfred. And that was after the close family friend, Wilfrid Laurier.
hmm.
So, and I've heard lots about Kate. I've got all of her old poems. I've got all of her writings, which are many. And so, along with those stories, which were always told in the family with great admiration, my dad in particular was very, very focused on bringing people up in a way that you just didn't discriminate. And I remember him talking about various incidents, and through his own actions throughout my life, it was like, people are just people, and you need to be good and kind and fair to all of them all the time. And so somehow I never got that piece that says X kind of people are bad or you should be mean to them. And he was a senior officer in the RCAF, and I grew up with these men who around us who were very senior officers, but to me they were just, and I always treated them and as my friend's dad. And so I never sort of got that piece that I was supposed to be intimidated by positions of authority. And then you add the piece about Kate, who was more than happy to take on authority and win. The story I tell about Kate is that she lived in Lachute, and the railway was going to go through Lachute, and it was going to go through her backyard. And in the end, it didn't. And she wrote a brief, and it was very well done. And she was told afterwards that they were astonished to find out it had been written by a woman. And so the railway went round Kate's house. So between that and growing up around authority but not being intimidated by it, has been a great help in my journey. I had no clue about myself, really, except there was a time, I think I was going into grade 11. It was either going into grade 11, yeah. And Miss Hunt had been our gym teacher. And this is so stereotypical, but it's true. And over the summer, Miss Hunt, who was going to be our gym teacher the next year, that following fall, got engaged. And all of we girls were clustered around, and everybody was oohing and awing and looking at her ring. And I said, I don't understand what all the fuss is about. It's a nice ring, but he's a man. The silence was deafening, and I didn't really realize what I'd said, but I got the message it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, it's fine, but what's she doing with a man?
Yeah. What's he going to bring to her life? She's
Yeah,
already a teacher, a
yeah,
phys ed teacher, a
yeah,
woman of power. What does
yeah,
she need a man for? Yeah, it makes sense.
yeah,
It makes sense itself.
yeah.
So, Liz, did you take this opportunity then to be your authentic self, or did you feel that you had to hide away for the time period until you perhaps understood yourself a little bit more?
Oh, I hid. I did the right thing. I went off to university, got married, was married to a man for 10 years. Um, had not really any clue. I do remember, I mean, we did all the right stuff, and except we weren't able to have kids. But I remember standing on the back porch of this wonderful old house that we were renovating, and thinking to myself, well, if this is love and this is happiness forever, I'm not impressed. And it was flat. I was working in the Waterloo area as a welfare worker, and that was in the old days when we used to go visit people in their homes. And it turned out that there was quite a collection of gays and lesbians who all knew each other, and several of them ended up becoming my welfare clients in Cambridge, Ontario. And it turned out that um, there was the Robin's Nest, which was a gay bar in Cambridge. And so as I got to know these people and they started to trust me, when I found out they were gay, it didn't mean it. It was like, so what? But they invited me and my then husband to come and for an evening to the bar. So I said, sure. And Robert didn't quite know what to make of it. But I remember walking up the stairs to the dance floor. And as I walked up those stairs, there was a waltz on. And a male couple waltzed by, and then a female couple waltzed by. And in my head, it was, that's how it's supposed to be.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the beginning of my coming out process. Again, I was very surprised when lots of people said to me, oh, be careful. One of my best friends said to me, Liz, be careful. People are going to think you're perverted. I went, why?
Yeah. Let
Yeah.
them think that.
Yeah. So I was very fortunate in that I sort of never got that piece of being gay was awful.
It resonates so well because there is that moment where all
Yeah,
of us within the community, there's that pause where
yeah,
everything goes silent
yeah,
and there's nothing in the air. There's a little bit of electricity,
yeah,
and you just know that
yeah.
life is not ever going to be the same again. And
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
I recognize that myself with my own experience where I know exactly when I knew the switch was happening.
Yeah. It just and so life is never the same again. I remember the scene in the movie Bohemian Rhapsody in which he goes off to a bar, and there's that moment where he's entering the bar, and it's a gay bar, and that electricity is just there, and they caught it so well. And between and the rest is history for him, but as we know. But it was it's just a moment in time, and everything changes.
Yeah. So let's talk about your history, Liz. You know, you've brought us to the point now where you are going to jump head first or feet first into this lesbian lifestyle, perhaps. So, Liz, you've talked about being in Ontario and yourself now recognizing yourself as being part of this other community. What brought you to Alberta?
Oh, I was in graduate school and studied getting my master's in social work and working working pretty well full time at the same time. It was in boom times here in Alberta when but the government started to realize that yeah, there was lots of money around, but there was nobody to look after any of the social problems that we're having. And so they decided to create bursaries for people in clinical social work across the country. They paid us a ridiculous amount of money, large amount of money every term. And but then I had to come to Alberta to work it off. And so I did. As I was outside walking Sadie, it just never occurred to me that just because I was a lesbian or just because somebody was a gay man, that people should think there was something wrong with us. It just never occurred to me. It never made sense. And so I guess you could call it incredibly naive, but I think I was very fortunate because that piece just never took hold. And so I remember being quite stunned when nasty things would be in the paper. And I think, well, that's not right. They shouldn't be saying that. I'm a nice lady. Yeah. And still at times it just boggles my mind the way that people treat other people. But yeah, so I was very active, got very active in London, Ontario, and then when I was doing a placement, and then when I came out here, that I just continued because
So, when you came out to Alberta,
yeah.
were you out at this time?
Oh, I was out. My marriage ended, and I think it would have ended even if I wasn't gay. But I think it helped him save face that I I came out and to everybody and said, I'm a lesbian, and so I need to get a divorce and be on my own and stuff. And so, as I say, there's that piece of astonishment that I should be pretending and hiding. It made no sense to me because I just felt so, and that wonderful sense of energy. It's all of a sudden the pieces have come together, and the world makes sense.
Yeah.
And somehow you're supposed to hide that. I thought, I don't think so.
Yeah.
This is
Exactly.
too good. This is too good to hide. I came to Alberta and to Camrose, Alberta. Oh my!
I'm from Stettler originally, so I know the area.
Yeah,
I'm Botha specifically.
Yeah, and I worked in children's services there, and I had a great boss. And after about 6 months or 4 or 5 months, I'm just not a small town person, and it was mostly because I'd come from a certain amount of privacy in my life, I guess, and not a hiding, just not everybody knowing all my business stuff, and I had moved out here with a woman named Kelly, and we had bought a camera, and we took and I went in to pick up the film once it was developed, and the guy said to me something about, oh, how does Kelly like the new camera? And I thought, oh Lord, you can't even change your socks and the whole town knows about it. And so I immediately began looking for work in Edmonton, and it didn't take long before I was here. And but when I was in Camrose, I had begun the process of connecting with Womonspace in Edmonton.
Before you actually go further,
Yeah.
Liz, let's talk about Womonspace. What is Womonspace and the purpose of the organization at this time and as it moved forward?
I don't think it really, I don't think Womonspace really exists anymore. Womonspace was formed by some very wonderful women who wanted a place for women to socialize. So it was mostly socializing and then having monthly dances. And there's been some interesting histories written around on the history of Womonspace, and but it was mostly seen as social support and dances. There were some ball games in the summertime, as I recall, but mostly what I recall was the primary focus was these was a drop in and then the dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the time frame? Which years are we talking about when you first started being part of Women's Space?
83, 84.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a significant year upon itself, because if I were to go into what else was happening during that decade, the HIV AIDS
Yeah.
crisis had started. So you're now finding a space for women during this time when, now I'm going to say this as a broad general, when men are being decimated with the disease. That doesn't take away the fact that many women were experiencing the health issues themselves when it came to HIV and AIDS as well. Yourself, you're getting thrusted in many different directions, finding a safe space for yourself, but also a community at large that is in flux.
I think that I would put that quite differently. I think that the women's space events had been going on for a while. Can't remember when they actually started, but it was probably a few years before I came along. And there were many women who were involved in the care of the men with HIV.
Yeah.
My former wife was a palliative care nurse, and she was one of the first nurses to be involved with home care and HIV and men with AIDS. And you know, the community was being decimated, but it was a very hard time. I remember that at one point in the ledge, one of the Tories stood up and wanted to pass a bill saying that people with HIV should be put in camps. And that was seriously discussed. And I remember my good friend Randy, who was ill with HIV, and he called me the next night, and he was so upset and so scared. And I remember standing in the kitchen and sort of leaning against the wall, shows you how old I am because the telephone was on the wall, and talking to him, and finally got him laughing because I said to him, "Now look, Randy, if they come for you, you know we won't let you go by yourself. So we'll have you know, the place will be gorgeous because you fags will make it all pretty,
Of
and
course.
you know, and you guys will do the cooking, although some of us women will help us with some of that stuff. And if there's any building or carpentry or electricity that needs to be done, we women will just look after all that, so we'll be fine."
Yeah. And to think that it's just shy of 40 years
Yeah.
that we had the talk that people with HIV should be sent to camps. That's
Yeah.
less than 40 years. Led Zeppelin has one of their greatest albums out. That's 50 years this year.
Yeah.
And yet here we're talking about less than 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I'm sure you've interviewed others who have talked about the AIDS issues, but they were very real. Because I worked for social services in those days, the librarians would photocopy the cover page or the index page of all the journals they got, and they would put those together and circulate them. And if there's anything you were interested in, you could just indicate it, and then they would make a photocopy and it arrive in your basket a couple of weeks later. And it seems so primitive now, but I got called into my boss's office and said that my secretary was concerned because I was ordering too many articles on HIV and AIDS, and she thought it was dangerous.
Oh.
Yeah.
And here you are in a role to support others.
Yeah.
And this is what's taking place.
Yeah. Boost my sometimes flagging energy. I think of some of those stories, and there's the energy. We were also invited, the New Democrats invited us into the House and wanted to introduce us. And we were up in the visitors gallery, a bunch of us. All of the Tories turned their backs on us. To a person.
Lougheed still premier at this time, or is this now gone to Getty?
I can't remember.
But it's in that
it's in that time frame.
Influence.
Yeah. And these and again, I remember, I grew up in the Air Force, and so I know about etiquette.
Yeah.
And I was just stunned. I thought, they're really rude.
Yeah.
Was my first thought.
And they're supposed to be progressive conservatives.
Yeah, and this is just really rude, and somebody ought to talk to their mothers. And I was, and then I realized that we were being publicly shunned. And which pissed me off even more.
Yeah. And then we have to sit and listen to people go, well, why as a community as a whole do we not support conservatives today or throughout our lifetime? And it's because of situations like this where there have been no real apologies or recognition.
They don't care.
Yeah, they don't give a damn whatsoever. And a lot of these people are still in places of power.
That's right. And one of the ironies of the world is that one of Ralph Klein's main publicity people is a lesbian. She's not, obviously he's gone. She's not doing that anymore. And she used to sit in cabinet and listen to that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And took it.
Yeah. But, and she was, she was a good Tory. Mm-hmm. So the lots of contradictions.
Yep, absolutely. And we have it today.
Yep, it hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed a bit within the now known UCP. There's some well-known community members within that party who are trying to be on the inside enacting change, and they just get shit upon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to support. Hey, Liz, I want to bring light to you, especially with HIV Edmonton and your involvement in building HIV Edmonton itself. So what can you talk about that when it comes to both the DJs and your involvement with?
Well, in those days, GALA was very active. Gay and Lesbian Awareness was very active. And Michael Fair had come back from the States where he was getting his master's degree. And we all got involved. And then the first case was discovered here. And and all of this nonsense and hatred was boiling up. And so Michael invited some of us to his house, and we sat around and we decided that, well, we needed to get going on this and we needed to do something. So there were meetings and plannings and all of that good stuff. And HIV was, and the AIDS Network was born. And it's an interesting story in that I was on the first board of the AIDS Network, but I didn't continue, and it was primarily because of a different view, which I thought that our energy would be better spent doing education than being in a sort of traditional not-for-profit society. There was an expectation of Michael's that it would form an organization, and yes, there would be education, but the other thing that was going on at the time was that a lot of the energy from GALA had gone into the AIDS Network, into the formation of that. So I decided that I needed to continue with the work of GALA and keep that going while these others did the AIDS Network stuff. Mm-hmm. But Michael tells that the reason it was called the network is because I insisted so much on networking, and that was in recognition of that.
Which is a great thing. It's a lot of foresight that you had, especially at that time when things are coming at everybody just at a million miles per hour, and recognizing that this network needs to be in place in this education piece, because with education, perhaps at one point you can get ahead of the issue rather than always reacting.
But was I right? Was he right? I think we're both right, and that's all that matters.
You did what needed to be done at that time.
And we haven't talked about GALA much, but we'll need to.
Yes, let's do that right now.
A driving force. And GALA formed, and I don't know, I think I've sent you some of these names, but I became involved with Womonspace, and they had a board, and they really thought, and they had a public relations position on the board. Again, my naivete took over, and I thought, well, that's something I can do. I can talk to the world about this organization. That's no problem. Well, the piece that I missed entirely is that it was a very closeted organization, and we had lots of hard times around that issue. But early on I think it was the winter of '84, and you really must talk to John Doyle, because he kicked a lot of this off. And he and some other guys invited Womonspace to this meeting to talk about something for Pride. And John was living, the house I think has been torn down, but I would often drive by this big old house on the river, and we met. And again, we thank God we didn't know what we were doing, because we just went ahead and did it. And we got this group together there was me, and there was Lorna Murray, and John and Jeff, and Barry Bro, and we started working on collecting people together for something for Pride. And so there's lots of funny stories there. But we decided that we'd have a Pride week. And although we had enough ideas for a Pride month, and so we did. And we went around to various organizations and talked to people and convinced them, harassed them, whatever. And Pride week came. Yeah. One of the funny stories is that we decided we needed a poster. So we designed a poster, and there's a guy who was publishing some stuff and printing stuff. Ray, I think his name was. He had an office upstairs on 124th Street, just across from Times 10. And so he offered to do that. Well, John went to get the draft of the poster and brought it back, and it was full of mistakes. And so Lorna and I wouldn't allow it to be accepted. And John wasn't real keen on going back and, being the bad guy. So I think it's Ray Linguante was his name. Poor Ray, he had Lorna and I arrive in his place shortly after 4:30 one night. And guess what? We got the posters reprinted for free and corrected. But he also gave us the old ones. And we chopped the top half of it, and it had GALA and our insignia on it. And I don't know if it was that year, maybe it was another year, but the nylon, we thought about inviting the nylons to come to town.
Oh,
The
yeah.
nylons wouldn't come to town unless we could guarantee that there were only gay people in the audience. So we couldn't figure out how to do that. But they came to the Jubilee anyhow. So a bunch of us got those brochures, and we went to the parking lot when the Nylons concert was on, and we put these things that said gay and lesbian awareness on people's windshields. Just to be bad.
I love it. I love it. Hey, and just a blast from the past. I think the Nylons did a remake of the Go Ahead and is it Go Ahead and Kiss Them Goodbye? That na 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 hey hey goodbye.
Yeah. And then we were and most of us were good little civil servants, and so there we were. And this woman who was a security guard and looked, if you wrote the picture of the butch security guard, there she was, and she picked up one of the flyers and said, "Oh my God, lesbians!" So we scattered.
The lesbians are coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, so that's brilliant.
Yeah. So one of the things, though, that I always push for is that if we can't have fun, it's not going to work.
Exactly.
And if we can't have fun, and if we can't eat good food together, then forget it.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I always talk about, is that whatever the cause is, whatever the work is, if you're not laughing, you're not doing it right. Not that we can't be serious and be angry and shed tears and stamp our feet, but and have big disagreements. But I think I was talking to Michael about this a while ago, about one of the things that seems to have changed is that these days you can't, if somebody disagrees with you, they take it really personal and everybody's mad and angry and upset. Whereas Michael and I had some real knockdown, drag out differences, but we still loved each other. And we knew that, as he said, we knew that, I was right and he was clearly wrong, etc., and vice versa. But that we were working for something larger than our egos.
Yeah. And you gave each other space to listen to each other and to recognize those differences. Because good Lord, if we all came in with the same cultural lens or the same lens on every issue, then
but nowadays you say boo and it's wrong, or it's racist, or it's something or other. And so I think that's one of the pieces that if we could get back into our lives, that ability to have a conversation and disagree and still be respectful and caring, we'd be better off. Yeah.
You mentioned the first Pride, and we're looking at early 80s. Could you tell us how many people would have been attending events that first year?
Well, I don't have the record, but there would be a 20 or 30 or 40 people maybe at each event.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I came across the old calendar and the corrected poster, but there was a dance, Womonspace, and I don't know, whatever the Pride Center was called then. We joined together and had it, and there was a dance, and that was very well attended with both men and women.
So there was that obvious need and wish and desire to
Yeah,
have something to call our own and to feel that pride.
yeah, and we did a darn good job,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I do say so myself. And so that summer, after Pride, those of us who'd been involved in it decided that we should reward ourselves with a little picnic. So we went off to, I think it was Harlech Park, and we'd had our picnic and we were sitting around. There were a couple of lovely moments. One was Barry Bro said that he was involved with the gay Catholics, and he said, they were trying to do some work because the province was opening up the Individual Rights Protection Act for revision, and it would be a good time for us to try and get sexual orientation put in there. And so, as I say, for myself, not knowing any better, we said sure. And this was a lovely moment in which John and Jeff were early in their relationship. And I looked over and I can't remember, but one of them was sitting down and the other one had his head in his lap and was stroking his hair. Mm-hmm. So it was a moment of just pure, clean intimacy that, it was just lovely.
Yeah.
So I said, well, since we seem to have done a pretty good job of working together, putting on this first Pride thing, maybe we should take on the GALA thing, the civil rights thing. And so off we went, and we started that. If only you know, eh?
Yeah. So were you naturally a glutton for punishment?
I guess so.
I guess.
Well, I think it was just that. Well, okay, well, we should do that, and let's just go do that. And again, it was that naive sense that, well, we'll just go have some nice chats with the politicians, and they'll agree with us, and it'll be good. Yeah. Of course, they're wrong.
Yeah. So for the people who may not have this backstory in understanding when it comes to human rights, where are lesbians, gay men, bisexual people, transgender? Where are we at this time frame when it comes to equality and rights?
Now?
At that time.
Well, at that time, we didn't exist.
Yeah.
We there were no references in human rights legislation anywhere to protection under the grounds of sexual orientation. And so we had no protection. We could lose our jobs. We could, people could refuse, it's ironic. People could refuse to rent to us, or if we were in couples, our spouses were, we couldn't get married. We couldn't get, joint life insurance. All of that stuff just wasn't there. And so it was quite radical when we popped up and said, here we are, we want in. And
yeah, so again, this is less than 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And so Liz, I'm going to just throw this out here, knowing, and please know the levity of how I'm saying this. So obviously then, to me, the first time that yourself and others spoke up about this, the politicians, as well as Alberta, Canada as a whole, they quickly listened to all of you and put everything into place.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Yeah, that's why we have boxes and boxes and boxes full of papers and meeting records. No, they they didn't. But the big stories made up a bunch of funny little ones. And we'd been to see Les Young, and he was the Minister of Labor.
Mhm.
And we'd had this very nice meeting, and everybody was nice and polite. And he said, until this is being talked about in the coffee shops and shops of the province, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's fine. Half an hour later, I'm in Safeway getting milk on the way home, and right in front of me is Les Young getting milk on the way home in the same store. I just laughed. I just said, Les, well, it's not a coffee shop, but it comes pretty close.
Yeah, exactly.
He just shook his head. Just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And
But you know what he said there, there's a lot of truth to what he did
yeah,
say. That's
yeah,
when it goes back to Harvey Milk, and he's,
yeah,
he was saying that, come out,
yeah.
by coming out, it starts those conversations. So yet here's this person who's blocking the way, but there's some truth and wisdom to what he was saying.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I know Murray often talks about coming out hinders discrimination, and discrimination hinders coming out. And I've always pushed people really hard to come out. I'm a psychologist, and I've done lots and lots of work in my private practice with our community, and I always push people to come out, because if you're not out, and I mean, you don't have to be out to the media, but out clearly to everyone in your life, then you're keeping a secret, and secret keeping is always bad.
Yeah.
And so I push people and push people and push people, because otherwise it's just hanging in the air, and everybody knows but nobody talks about it. And that's not enough. That's not good enough.
I think about this time frame, because this is my formative growing up years, where I'm still a child and growing up in Botha, Alberta, Stettler,
Oh dear.
Alberta. Yeah, and I love the places, but the queer representation happened on the cover of People's Magazine when a celebrity had been outed
Yeah.
or dying of HIV a week before they passed away, like a Rock
Yeah.
Hudson,
Yeah.
that type. And so growing up, we didn't see people like yourself, and we didn't
Yeah.
see the Michael Fairs, the Murray Billets, and
Yeah.
others that you mentioned. So what did you and others do at that time to get our stories spoken about in those coffee places, in the Safeway, in the milk aisle? What was being done to make sure that our stories were beginning to be talked about, in addition to coming out? Is there anything that you can point out?
We talk to anybody and everybody. We're quite relentless about. I mean, one of the first things we did is we went and we met with all of the politicians, and so that was interesting, and we kept at it. But anytime there was anything that we could comment on, we would comment on it, either myself or Michael or Murray or somebody. And so we just kept finding opportunities for bringing it forward, not only out there, but in our own community. I remember we were doing a letter writing campaign, and so we went to, I don't know if it was a women's dance or pride dance, but a bunch of us went, and we'd written up a letter, but I think it was Maureen Irwin who said what we should do is have various versions of the letter and print it on different colors, because the politicians won't figure out that all of these letters that come in that have been signed, that are originals, but they're on different colors of paper, and the letters are all somewhat different, or most of them are different. So they'll think it's from a whole bunch more people than it's actually from. And that worked, because
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was Les Young or who said to me, like, when we started to interact with GALA, we thought that there were thousands of you. There's 8 or 10 of us. And so we just had to be smart.
Yeah. Taking that form letter, but making sure that it was changed in enough
Yeah.
ways that people didn't catch on.
Yeah, they didn't catch on.
Brilliant.
And so, and the different colors, and Maureen Irwin, I don't know if the others have talked about Mo, but she was a godsend, and it's so sad that she's passed. And she was just everybody's grandmother. She was warm and wonderful and funny, and and she just kept working at stuff. And she got, she'd find ways to get various church congregations to have, to have her come and speak. And she had what she called her United Church dress, the only dress she owned. And so it's about a filter that looks at everything that's going on around you, directly and indirectly, through a filter of how can we educate in this instance? How can we use this to our advantage to create more awareness and more knowledge? And it didn't really matter what the fill in the blank was. We'd talk to any politician, we'd talk, and then we'd talk to the press. And we were good to the press, and they were good to us. And we gave, good interviews with good information, and we didn't rant and rave and call people names, which I think is a large, which is a mistake that gets made a lot now.
Yes,
People
it
are
does.
so busy being nasty that the message gets lost. And so we sort of all had this notion that we were okay, and so why shouldn't we talk about this? Now, who was it? I think it was John, who we'd sent a letter to a politician about something, and we hadn't heard. So John, I think it was John, phoned up to find out what was going on. And the poor secretary who was taking the notes from taking the message, John said, is from the Gay and Lesbian Awareness Society of Edmonton. And she's going, the gay and la, 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 la. She couldn't say it. It's a poor dear. But
Or we would say, bless her.
Yes, bless her. Yes. And so it was just, I think it's the cumulative effect of all of that. Then when you're just you're going around living your life as you are, and you're positive and you're hopeful and you're clear and demanding at the same time, then eventually change starts to happen.
Yeah. And we need to make mention here for some of our listeners that during this time frame that we're talking about, there's no access to podcasts or personal blogs, and the social media that we know of today did not exist whatsoever. That these footsteps that had to be created with every single organization, political group, church around.
Yeah.
That was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and wasn't simply an email that could be passed along. That was the knocking on the door. And so we just need to remind people of that aspect. That
yeah. I mean, if you wanted a list of all the United Churches in Edmonton, you had to go to the paper phone book, look them all up, write them all down, write out a list, type it, and then put each whatever you were sending out in an envelope and put a stamp on it. And that would take several days to be delivered, and then you'd have to wait for a response.
Yeah.
And so it was very different. And I remember Michael and I talking about that at the U of A, some grad students a few years ago, and they were just astonished.
Mm.
And we had to use, we had, what's that, carbon paper to make
Yes.
copies. And, and so things were very different.
Yeah. And when you were using the typewriter and you made a mistake with the keystroke you
Yeah,
made,
yeah,
that took a life of its own. Or when the ribbon was
yeah,
out, or
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And um, so I know that some of our bonding time was sitting around stuffing envelopes.
yeah.
And then we had to find ways to pay for postage. And we found some creative ways that I won't mention right now, but to get
The statute of limitations are not up yet.
no, probably not. And so we looked at least we mostly looked at things as, well, okay, that didn't work, what are we going to do next?
Mm.
It was and we went to the Human Rights Commission a bunch of times, and Phil, what's his name, was the director of the Human Rights Commission for a while, and he was black man, so that was pretty strange in Alberta, and he was a big supporter, but we just kept after them, and I remember, I can't remember quite the details, but they were meeting at Government House. Cabinet, I guess, was meeting at Government House along with the Human Rights Commission, I think. And somehow we didn't get invited. So we held a protest outside. And how things change, because the woman who is either just the current or the past moderator of the United Church was at that protesting, and was chanting, "We're here, we're queer, get used to us." And it was, yeah. And I didn't know how involved she'd gotten in the church, because she was very involved with Wicca at the time. And it was only, in the last 4 or 5 years that I discovered that the woman that I knew as Snake, which was her Wicca name, was now the moderator of the United Church of Canada. It's like, oh, well, good for you. Exactly.
Amazing people's journeys, right?
Yeah. And so it's about, I think it's about helping people see that something is more possible than they think. Yeah. And knowing that there was real risk, real pain, real hurt, real fear, and just believing that somehow, if we just kept at it long enough, something would give.
Yeah.
And so GALA did, huge work with newspapers and reporters, and learned a lesson one time when we called a press conference. We were all hot and bothered about something, and we all gathered to do the press conference, but the press didn't come. We hadn't put the date on it. Oh, well.
Yeah. Lessons learned.
So make sure the date's on your press conference invites.
Yeah.
And
well,
so
there's no press agents, there's no managers at the time. You're figuring things out as you go.
Yeah. It's like, oops. Oh, well.
Hey, Liz, I need to backtrack just a little bit because of what meant something that you said, and I know that there'll be questions that come from it.
Yeah.
You're talking about the person who was leading the Human Rights Association at that time, being a black man, and that was strange, that was different. And so, can you just give a little bit of insight why that was at this time in Edmonton, in Alberta?
Oh, good Lord, it was the time of Ralph Klein. It was very conservative. And there were, one of the things about Alberta is that it's very interesting in that it can be very redneck, very socially conservative. And then it has these little blips where somebody says, God, I can't remember his last name. I can see him in my mind's eye. He's got a good background and he'd be a good Human Rights Commission guy. And, we probably get brownie points for having a person of color. It just wasn't happening, wasn't done. This is, even Ralph made Lois Hole the lieutenant governor. It's like, wow.
That was shocking.
Yeah.
Lois Hole being one of my great uncle's closest friends.
And cool.
And it was just remarkable. But I remember myself as being this younger gay child, just not understanding everything. But even in my head, I was like, this doesn't connect with what I've been taught. And still to this day, it still doesn't make sense to me how that came to be, because
I don't know. Because for those of us, listening who don't know about Lois Hole, Hole's greenhouse in St. Albert was hugely successful. And it was started by Lois and Jim Hole, who were just two of the nicest people ever put on the face of the earth. And Lois, she was a big farm woman who'd give you a big hug and so generous. And so I don't know, maybe it was the farming. I have no idea how it led to her being made lieutenant governor, but it was a wonderful mistake.
Yes.
On it's like, what kind of meds is Ralph on?
Yes.
Or not
which
on.
one of that day, or not on, exactly.
Yeah. And again, going back to GALA, and we decided that we'd have our first little parade, and we met in by the market in Strathcona, and we decided that probably we should have some flowers to make it look pretty. So off we went to Lois Hole. We had flowers for days. We had flowers and we had flowers and we had flowers. She wouldn't take a penny for them. And, it was like, holy smokes.
Yeah.
And she just said, I believe in you guys. And, here's another 3 boxes of petunias. Help yourself. And she was just so open and so generous. And I have some wonderful pictures of decorating that year. And by golly, we had flowers. And so it was that openness of spirit that I want to say Phil Wilson, but I don't think that's right. Phil Johnson, Phil something. And so we had an ally in him because he knew what it was like to be shunned and mistreated. And he didn't increase his popularity any by supporting us, but that's okay. And so I think it has to be both the big view and the little view, sort of simultaneously. You have to have a filter that's always looking for an opportunity to bring up a subject directly or even indirectly, and be willing to be told no a whole bunch of times, and just to say, oh, well, never mind, something else will happen.
Yeah, and keep going with it.
Yeah, and one of my phrases now is keep on keeping on. And a few years ago, when I was still working for the Department of National Defense as a therapist, we had a case conference, and everybody's supposed to be, open and careful or open and respectful and all of that good stuff. And somebody at Case Conference presented this, just didn't know what to do with him, with this young guy who had come in as a client or been sent in as a client. And you can just see it. These two young soldiers had fallen, head over heels in love. Mm. They were in the same group or the same unit. Anyhow, they knew each other. And one of them came from a very fundamentalist family and was having a real hard time. So they sent him into mental health for some help. Well, those psychologists tiptoed around and didn't know what to do and didn't know what to say and didn't know this and didn't know that, because it was too young. You just see these two young soldiers all hot and horny all the time, but it's for each other. Mm-hmm. And so this went on for a few minutes. Well, and what about, and blah, blah, blah. Finally, I said, oh, for God's sakes, stop it. It's two young men who have fallen head over heels in love in a very inconvenient way. Yeah. And it's up to you to figure out how to help them. Yeah. It's a broken heart story. There's nothing unusual about that. And I said, and if you can't figure out that, in Edmonton, there's a Pride Center where this young man can go and meet others. And I was thinking of Fred Dick, who did a lot of stuff there. Mm-hmm. And get some support and some help along the way, then that's what you bloody well need to do. And if you can't figure that out for yourselves, you can bloody well send them to me and I will. Yeah. It was quiet. Nobody talked to me for the rest of the day.
I love it. We're going to actually take the transition into military and police, and with your background with what you've done here, and because I really want to get into that as well. But I need to go back a little bit, just because I'll never have a chance again on a podcast to say this. And it comes back to Lois Hole. Yeah. I remember Lois Hole, and I was 12 perhaps at this time. So we're looking late 80s. And she had been visiting my great uncle, Marvin Jocelyn, out on his lily farm. He had an acreage just outside of Spruce Grove. And
was that your uncle?
Yeah, my great uncle. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't know.
Yeah. See, now with my Uncle Marvin, he was always somewhat of a closeted man within the family and never really came out. But everybody understood he was a confirmed bachelor. Yeah. But I remember walking out on the field with my Uncle Marvin and Mrs. Hole, and just listening to them as they were just talking about the beauty and the colors. And it was just a comfortable relationship. And I remember being comfortable and just feeling okay, because I'm figuring these things out. I'm looking at the only real life gay person in my life, and him talking to this beautiful woman and just knowing that he was okay. And so if I can just take a second, my great uncle Marvin, I just want to give tribute for him. A difficult life because he felt he had to be in the closet, confirmed bachelor. I just want to give tribute to, and I'm going to cry.
Yeah. Me. Well, I've got tears in my eyes.
Yeah. I just, wherever he is right now, I just want him to know that someone was listening and someone understood and always loved. And I'll never have a chance to otherwise bring into this conversation otherwise. So thank you for bringing up Mrs. Hole.
Well, I'll add something.
And you know the lily guy. That's fantastic.
Well, there's another part to that story, which is 4 of us started something called the End Club in Edmonton, called Edmontonians Networking Discreetly. And it was me and Michael and my then partner, Catherine, and Barry Bro. And we dug out our books and listed up all the names of people we could find. And we began having networking events. And because of who we were. We were, we had wine and cheese after work um, at the Holiday Inn on the Kingsway. And they were quite successful and went on for many years. And one of the things that we did was somebody rather knew about this guy who farmed lilies and that he was part of the community. And so some of us went out there to have a tour. Edmontonians Networking Discreetly, we went out there, and that's where I met him.
I never knew.
Yeah,
I
and
never
the
knew.
irony of it was that I'd been ordering lilies from some outfit in Toronto, and I looked down, and there was a box of the lilies being shipped to Toronto, so I could pay premium price and get them back again.
Yeah.
But no. So you see how it all intertwines, and that's why it's so important for people to be out, and for the all of these bits and pieces to work together, so that you and I are having tears over your uncle.
Yeah.
And Lois, and I knew Lois, and it all just starts to connect.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Just remarkable.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I can have my little proclaim time as I'm listening here as well.
Okay.
And Liz, we're going to have multiple parts to this conversation because going into our conversation today, I knew that you have a wealth of information. I just didn't understand the connection you have with people. There's a storytelling in that there's that intimacy in listening to what you're saying and with the names, and it's not you going, oh, we did this, but you're also telling us about the people and emotions and feelings and that togetherness with it, and that's a storytelling that is just absolutely brilliant. So Liz, we're not going to stop today because I want to continue this conversation for
Super.
as many times as we can. So I just want to,
Yeah.
put on record that I am honored today. I'm just absolutely honored. Liz, we'll talk about this at length in upcoming episodes as well, but you have a very strong connection to the police service, the military in the background. And so I'd like our listeners to learn a little bit more about how that became not just because of your family and you listening to your father and your father's friends, but why it was so important to be a liaison, to have our voice be at the table with the police services, with military, especially during these years in the 80s and the 90s.
It comes back to the same thing. It just astonished me that the police would mistreat us.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, we got to go do something. We got to go talk to them. I mean, it was that it was sort of that simple. There were stories of gay men, and there was the Pisces raid and stuff, and there were some stories coming around about gay men getting hassled in the parks, and so it just seemed to me as obvious as the nose on your face that if people aren't getting along properly, well, then you go talk about it.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like a big deal to me. And so Michael wrote the letter to the police chief, and and so a date was set, and George Davison and I, George has passed, unfortunately, went off to meet with the police. And once again, I thanked my upbringing, that I wasn't at all intimidated. I was more curious than anything. And we had this nice meeting, and we met with Staff Sergeant Joe Rogers and Sergeant Kathy, I can't remember her last name, but I've got it. And as Joe was trying to wrap up, he was trying to wrap up the meeting, and we're supposed to come up with goals and things. He says to me, "Well, Liz, like, if we do this work for a while, and how will you know? How will we know that it's that it's working?" A very appropriate goal kind of question. So I looked at George and I looked at Joe, and I said, "Well, Joe, I think this will take a while, but I figured that when we're able to put a notice up in the change room here at the station that we're looking for police to come to volunteer to help out at the Pride Parade, and would they please let us know who wants to do that, then we'll be good." I thought the poor man was going to fall off his chair and lose his healthy.
Go, what? Yeah.
Oh dear. And Kathy looked at me and said, "Oh." And he said, "Well, Liz, I think that'll probably take a bit of time." And I said, "Yeah, but now we know where we're going."
Oh, it's just brilliant.
And so again, it's that intimacy, it's that connection, it's that, well, this is a problem and we got to figure it out, and we'll just get going on it.
Yeah.
And oh dear, the look on his face.
Oh,
and of course, at the time, I didn't know that he was a good Catholic and had 5 kids. But whatever, he didn't care.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, you fight through, and people have got to learn somehow, right?
and I think that I really do. I think that when you talk with people who are involved in making change and are successful one way or the other, I think that's a trait in common.
Mm-hmm.
They don't come in and lecture you. The Nelson Mandelas of the world didn't come in and lecture you. They talked.
Yep.
And they related on a human basis. And that's where I think that we had our successes. That, part of it was the times, I guess, because we were the leading edge, but it was that willingness to operate from an assumption that we're going to win, that we are going to get our rights eventually, because it's the right thing to do. And if we just keep bugging people in a polite and funny and humorous and memorable way, eventually something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And and so when you look at the hours that we spent with GALA having our potluck suppers as we worked, well, we figured out that we're mostly civil servants, and we'd meet after work, and if we had supper together, we wouldn't be so grumpy.
we weren't going to get hangry with each other.
That's right. Yeah. And so we started having, so we'd eat, and I remember times when the police were driving by to take down the license plate numbers of the people who were at Michael's house. And of course, most of us had to park a fair ways away, but that didn't matter. And, I remember often we would say, well, why don't we just go out and invite them in? It's a cold night, like, wouldn't they like some supper?
Yeah.
And we never did, but it was that attitude of, well, geez, you guys, we got lots of food. Come on in.
Yeah.
That it's part of Michael's success, always feeding people, but that openness to, well, just come along and we'll talk about it and we'll sort it out. Mm-hmm. But it comes out in every little detail of what you do. And it's the attention to those little details, like remembering to put the date on the press release. Or when we had the Alice's Tea Party fundraiser for, I think it was for the network, and and it was just it was ridiculous, and it was so well done, and everybody had fun. And again, we tackle a tough thing by saying, okay. And I remember poor people. Where were we? In Howard Park, maybe, or the River Valley? I can't remember. But these poor families out with their families for a picnic, and there's various drag queens and various assorted people playing croquet on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and just having a good time. And I'm sure some of those families picked up their sandwiches and went somewhere else, but they'd learned.
Yeah.
They'd learned. And so when you look at all of that as an opportunity for, I think it was my croquet set, actually. I think it was mine. As an opportunity to educate. And one of the things I think that we learned the hard way, of course, is that there's no such thing as bad publicity, because it gets people talking.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. And I'm sure most of us in our lives have seen that happen. Because when the people are ranting and raving about something, I mean, we see it right now with the anti-vaxxers.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually in a sort of a backwards way helping with the education.
Yep, absolutely.
So
an example of this as well is with our Pride Corner on White that we do on Friday nights.
Yeah.
We have one particular street preacher, wannabe cult leader, who films, and part of our group wants to push back against it, but I'm like, just let him play. Let him play, because people are going to listen to that and kind of go, oh, this person's a little fucked up. And it does the work for us, that we don't have to do anything, that just let them press play and people will get the education that's needed.
And you're so right, because that work you've done there and are doing is so great, and you're to be commended, because it was done peacefully and just by being there and having a good time. And
Liz, I can tell you right now that we have, we're still out there, it's even it's in the winter and stuff like that. We didn't know what was going to happen with it, but we have a group of teens who are finding each other. The best sound is the sound when they all appear at the same time in that high-pitched squeal when they haven't seen each other for a week.
Yeah.
And they come together.
Yeah.
We have community leaders.
Yeah.
We're finding each other early.
Yeah. Fabulous.
We're going to be okay, because they're starting now and they're recognizing, and it's just brilliant that they can be themselves at an early age, and they can fall in love and not have a psychiatrist not find the words to how do you deal with the situation, but they're finding voices. Looking at time-wise and the natural conclusion of a podcast time, I'm going to wrap up part one.
Okay.
Liz, this conversation's meant a lot to me, not just because of you acknowledging and knowing who my great uncle is, but just you sharing your stories. And we just touched upon only a little, just a little, but with GALA, with what's now known as HIV Edmonton, with police services, this conversation's given that roadmap for the upcoming conversations. We're not even out of the 80s yet. And we've got so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
Liz, with somebody who's listening to part one of this conversation, what would you like them to really understand with what we've talked about here today?
Be honest with yourself. Be honest with others. Be out. It's scary and it's the safest place to be all the time. And that doesn't mean it's always easy. But if you do things with determination, with respect, with humor, because I've told some funny stories, over time, things change and they get better. And the people who want to belittle you, to put you down, to make you afraid, they're afraid. And the only way to help them with their fear is for us to be as out as possible and as wonderful as possible and earn their respect. Because once you earn their respect because you're a decent person, then they're confused and they got to support you. So that's how they learn.
Uh,
So keep on keeping on.
Yeah. I started this podcast because my now good friend Claire Perrin on episode 3,
Yeah.
she was really the first interview, but I started because I really wanted to understand why she was flourishing and really getting out there and out and about. And she's the reason why the podcast started. And I am reminded right now with everything, our conversation today is you've reminded me why this podcast continues, because there's so much learning to be had. And good Lord, I'm appreciative. So appreciative.
Good.
Okay, so we're going to go off camera here in a couple of moments and we're going to make plans for our weekly chats. You're just now going to become an institution on this show here as well.
Okay. Right.
I'm going to come back to you in a couple of moments here.
Okay.
Just because there's a couple of things I do want to just make mention. Hey, Tales of the LGBTQ Plus is a weekly video and audio podcast that showcases remarkable people like Liz Massiah, people who are within our LGBTQ plus community. And it's by listening to our stories, we gain insight and understanding and connection, and we're connecting with each other, being introduced to amazing people, topics, and let's not forget about breaking bread with each other and especially listening. This episode has been taped live, so there are going to be technical hiccups, voice snafus, other unexpected hijinks, and you won't see it, but there was a small break in there because we just have animals that just need our attention. But that part will be edited out, and you won't have seen it. But it's very likely that something has happened, and that's okay. I do a little bit of editing, but not much, because I want the conversations to be true and not just sliced into place. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you're listening on Spotify, please leave your reviews. YouTube, press subscribe. That helps us with the algorithms, and you get to hear stories like Liz, like Ron Byers, and as all the young upstarts within our community as well. And I say young with quotation marks because we're all young, especially at heart. So yes, it's fantastic. And as always, I'm based here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and it's important for me to say this because as I live and work and breathe on this land, I acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 6 territory, which is a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, traveling route for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. And I acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have transferred all over this land for centuries, especially the knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have come before us. I myself am listening and opening up myself to understanding, and it's through this journey that we learn truths. And that also goes with the truth with our 2S LGBTQIA community. And so, Liz, thank you again. This has been just remarkable for our listeners, but myself as well. There's a couple of moments I have goosebumps, and that's not just because we're taping this in November and it's a little bit chilly at the moment, but no snow on the ground. Just thank you. Just thank you for everything. And let's keep this conversation going.
You're welcome.
On behalf of Liz Massiah, my name is Douglas Parsons. You're listening to Tales of the LGBTQ+, reminding you to always be good and please text when you get home. And Uncle Marvin, thank you.
Yes,
Until
the lilies were wonderful, Uncle Marvin. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop now. So thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.